I think if there is a common thread that runs through this garage, is that every car has a story. And I think it's about the story. It's not just another one of those, but it's a car that won Le Mans, or a car that has some distinctive history, whether it's owned by Clark Gable or the first Corvette. I like the story.
Bruce, thanks for having us in today. This place is amazing.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, Maurice, because we've been meeting at car shows all over, and
that's right.
You have that great mustache. You're easy to identify, and I love your enthusiasm, so it's a pleasure to have you here.
Why do you think we care so much about these cars? What is it? I mean, out of all the things that you can spend your time and money on.
Well, for me, and I'm just guessing for yourself, it's part of your DNA, genetic makeup. I mean, I have loved cars from my very first breath on earth, okay? Cars and motorcycles. And I think what drew me to them at the beginning was the idea of getting something that was powerful and would take me for a ride,
Sure.
You could drive yourself rather than pedaling a bicycle and so forth. So I've always loved cars. And as a young person, you always like to go fast. And I just think it's something you can't take out of me. I have 3 children, and it took on one of them, and he's as car crazy as I am. So I think it starts with the love of being transported fast and fun. And then as you begin to experience more of the hobby and meet more of the people, because it's all about the people, you realize how important some of these cars are and how historic some of them are.
Right. And what was your first car?
My first car that I had some ownership in was a 1950 Plymouth, which was in 1958, which wasn't cool. My great aunt willed it to my sister and I, and so it wasn't anything I dreamt about or really wished for, but it was
a set of wheels.
It was a set of wheels, and it was available, and my parents were not car people. I mean, and that's being polite. I mean, there was no bigger waste of time than foolishly spending your time on cars or mechanical devices of any kind. Just work hard, save your money, and that type of thing. But when I went to college, you go through orientation, and my dad had given me the tuition money, but I visited the college tuition loan desk, and they said, no, we'll loan you the money for your tuition, interest-free, as long as you pay it back by the end of the school year. I said, I'll take one of those. Well, I already had the money, so I spent the money. I bought a 50 Merc. So that was the first car that I kind of decided for myself.
Was it a lead sled?
It was a black coupe, which was fortunate. And the first thing I did is I torched the front springs, drop it down in front. And I drove it for probably 6 months of the school year, sold it to a fraternity brother, and paid the loan off, and off I went. But the first car that I really did some homework on, and first new car that I ever had was a Porsche. In 1961, it was a 61 model. I bought it in 1960 from the local dealer in Hollywood, Competition Motors. So,
John von Neumann.
John von Neumann. Up until the time I ordered the Porsche, I was looking at Chevrolets with big engines and 4-speed. So I was going to order the cheapest body style, because I knew I could get that by my dad, and with the biggest engine I could in a 4-speed. So that's kind of what I was eyeing for. And then, so that was like in 1960, we were going to do that deal. And then I kind of had been eyeing these Porsche cars running around, and they intrigued me. I loved the look of them. I was following racing a little bit, and I thought, that might be an interesting option. So I looked into it, went up to see John von Neumann, got all the brochures, and I actually took European delivery. I took a year out of school and went around the world, so picking up the Porsche was like a really big thing. So I picked that up in 1961 in Stuttgart.
Wow.
It was my red period, so I had Signal Red, which is the brightest red they made.
Right.
And black interior, chrome wheels, because I love chrome wheels, No options, no radio, nothing. Small engine, no sunroof.
But all you needed.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I was a Porsche owner in 1961. But so you go to the factory and you announce that you're there, and they have it wasn't like they have it in a special place and they do a whole hoopla. But they had somebody deliver the car to me, and then they had one of the employees came out and gave me a lesson on driving the car and what to do and what not to do, and off I went. I drove it around Europe a bit and shipped it home and had the car from 61 to 64.
And meanwhile, back here in Los Angeles, Southern California, those early 60s, that was quite a time for the car scene.
So I was talking to a friend of mine, and we decided that he and I are the same age, that we grew up in the best time in the history of the world. I mean that. I mean, the car culture in the 50s and 60s was amazing. I grew up in Hollywood. So the drive-in circuit, Hollywood Boulevard, we'd cruised every Saturday night. That was just like what we did. I turned 16 in 1957. So from 57 to 70, I mean, this was amazing. I mean, there were, if you wanted to race sports cars, you could just literally tape over the headlights and go racing. If you wanted to go drag racing, there was a class for everything.
Yeah, plus there was Lions Drag Strip, Ascot Park, right?
Ascot wasn't, Ascot was the roundy round.
Right.
Motorcycles and stuff.
Right.
So you're right. Drag racing, you had Irwindale and San Fernando and Lyons and Santa Ana. You could go drag racing any weekend you wanted to. And Ascot was great. I didn't grow up circle racing so much with jalopies,
Sure.
that kind of stuff. And I didn't really have the discretionary money to do anything on a high level. Everything I did was pretty low level.
You've clearly corrected that, right? We've got some of the most valuable cars here in your collection. And I know you don't like to call yourself a collector. You like to call yourself an enthusiast. And the collecting just naturally follows that passion. But so you're out of college, finished with school at Berkeley, and now you got your life ahead of you, and you need to decide what to do. Did you have any doubts as a young man? What am I going to do with my life?
It's so funny because just recently I was talking to my friend. We go way back, and I think if I had any fear, it was the fear of failure. I just didn't want to disappoint my parents. If there's any credit due anybody for my success, is having a mother and father that I had. I mean, I would never be who I am today without them, because they kept me guided and working hard. And if it was up to me, I'd be, racing motorcycles somewhere. I mean, they really gave me great guidance and a good sense of value. And funny you should mention that, because I was trying to think the other day, kind of where I am and why I am, and I think that fear of failure had a lot to do with guiding me. And I never had any the idea of being a wealthy person that was never an aspiration for me. To have a lot of money, and that never drove me. I just tried to do the right thing and followed, my own, with the car thing. What you're looking at here is 50 years of one car at a time.
Right.
And I've tried to be very select on what I buy. I try and buy the absolute best example I can of whatever it is.
Cry once, right?
Yeah, I say, yeah, that's right. Buy the best and cry only once.
Yeah.
And it's the truth. That's been my guiding star. I really, a friend came in here the other day and said, you just had to steal all these cars, you're in them for nothing. I said, I looked around, there isn't a car in here that I paid under retail for. And most of the time I paid a premium to have that car. So I've just tried to buy the best example.
Well, the story that I love is the sealed bid you did on the Testarossa, right?
Yeah. So that was a car that I'd been chasing for, well, John von Neumann he sold me my first car. He was also a customer of our store, so I knew John von Neumann. I'd always admired him, and I remember looking through historical pictures of von Neumann, and he had this Testarossa, and it was called Johnny von Neumann's Hot Rod. Now, at the time, it wasn't like a GTO or something like uber expensive thing that I'd have to sell every last thing I own. You know, it just seemed like something I could maybe afford. So in our hobby, there's guys that can go out and find anything. So I had the two big car finders looking for me. And one of them came back to me and said, that car, you'll never get that car. I said, why is that? He said, that car had been impounded by Interpol. You know, that's the, like...
International Police Organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that it was going nowhere. It had belonged to a famous drug dealer, and they had seized all of his cars, and it's in The Hague, impounded. So I thought, well, that's enough of that. Well, you know, fast forward a year or two, and I'm on my way to Goodwood, and this friend of mine calls me and said, you know, I think that Testarossa you're looking at is going to go for sealed bid auction. Now, I'd never been on a sealed bid auction because you don't know where to start. You know, you don't know if it go low or high, you know. And they said, you have to have a letter of credit or a certified check in an envelope to bid on the car. I'm going, holy cow, there's no way I can put that together. So I called this friend of mine who had great banking relationships, and Chip Connor, who's a well-known collector. I said, Chip, you got to help me. I need a letter of credit for X amount. And can you connect me with your bank? I promise you I'm good for it, I'll take care of it. So Chip made one call, done, deal. So I go dancing across the ocean with my letter of credit, and I hired an attorney who was well known for car transactions, and I said, this is what I want to do. He said, no, I'm happy to handle it for you. So I put in my first bid like on Thursday when I got there, something like that. And I put in a bid that I thought was, if I can get it for this, I'm going to be really happy. And I'm thinking nobody knows about this, you know, because I didn't know about it, and I thought I knew what was happening globally. And I get to Goodwood, everybody's talking about this auction in The Hague, you know, all these cars, I'm going, holy cow, you know, so people do know about it. So I called the attorney and I said, we better raise my bid, you know, raise it to, you know, a little higher, because I don't want to miss this car. That was on Friday, and they were opening the envelopes Saturday. Well, one thing, I get worked up, really excited, you know, and I didn't sleep at all Friday night. I thought, if I miss this car, I'm going to be so unhappy. So I called the attorney early Saturday morning. I said, just bid the whole letter of credit. If I don't get it, then I can't afford it, and sure. That's it. You know, I gave it a good try.
Exactly.
I still wouldn't have been happy if I missed it, but. So the next morning, Friday at noon, on the windshield wiper of the Corvette is his business card. He said, "You won the car." So I won the car. So now I'm thinking, I wonder who was the underbidder. You know, how foolish did I go? And within like an hour or two, one of the fellows from Symbolic, which was a big Ferrari dealer at the time, came up and he said, "We were the underbidder on that Testarossa." I said, "You were?" I said, "How do you know what I bid?" He said, "Oh, no, it's published, you know." I said, "Well, how far under were you, you know?" And he told me, and it was just, you know, a very small part of the price. And I thought, right. Well, I just lucked out. So anyways, that's the story of that car.
And that car has the most extensive competition history of any Ferrari that's on the books, right?
Yep. It didn't win any, like, Targa Florio or Le Mans or Nürburgring. It was a car. John von Neumann was kind of the champion of the West Coast and Mexico. I think he raced that car at Nassau one time, but it won. I think the first year it won like 50 races. It was the most winning Ferrari. And when Ferrari celebrated their 70th anniversary, they did a video on that car as being the most winning Ferrari ever. So I guess it's won more races than any other Ferrari, but you know, not the great races, but a lot of wins, you know, P1s.
Well, Bruce, how about some racing heroes? Because I know you're really passionate about racing history, and you know, you've had some really fantastic drivers as personal friends. Who are some of the heroes
That's a good question. I grew up, my first hero was Parnelli Jones, because he was on Channel 5, the Jalopy Derby. And so the first guy I cheered for was Parnelli Jones. So he is probably the first guy I even knew was a race driver that knew the name of Parnelli Jones. And then as I got older, you know, you kind of learn more and broaden your view from jalopy racing. And I guess Dan Gurney would set as high a bar as you could. I mean, there was a gentleman, raced everything, did it all in a first-class manner, a patriot, and turned out to be a very good friend. And I'm still his widow, Evie, and Justin and Alex are still really good friends. So I think that just knowing the Gurneys has been a real treat for me. And so I would say Parnelli, then the Gurneys for sure, and then it would drop down quite a ways from there.
All right, Bruce, I have to ask you about another guy that you knew who has become this mythical creature, Steve McQueen. He is now on this pedestal, and I just want to know about the guy, the real guy.
Sure. Well, you know, it's interesting because he is a special guy, and still to this day. And right next to me is Clark Gable's Mercedes. And Clark Gable was the king and was the guy. And most of my son's friends have no idea who Clark Gable was. To me, he was like the most important actor in the world, you know.
Sure.
And now McQueen, who's since passed, is still like revered for all the right reasons. I mean, he was the king of cool.
Yep.
And when I was growing up, I raced motorcycles. And there was always the McQueen, Bud Ekins, Dave Ekins, you know, Malcolm Smith. They were all the really good riders, you know. And I was way back in the pack. But they hung out. They were always nice to everybody. It wasn't like they didn't want to socialize or. So my recollection of Steve was very much a man's man. Of course, the women loved him. I mean, he loved his beers, and he loved his bikes, and he loves his cars. Mm-hmm. And always very friendly to me. I owned one of his cars, and I sold it back to him with the idea that thinking he's going to sell it right away and I'll get it back. We made an agreement. If he sold it, it would come back to me.
It was a Porsche, right?
Yeah, a little Porsche Speedster. I'd owned a car for, probably 12, 14 years, maybe longer. And I loved the car. And he heard that I had it. He approached me and he said, it's probably not my car, but I'd love to see what you have. And so I said, sure. So I showed it to him. And by the way, when I got it, I paid $1,500 for this car. And the fellow that sold it to me, as we were just kind of concluding the deal, he said, this used to belong to Steve McQueen. I go, oh, cool. It didn't mean anything. I wouldn't have paid him any more. And I think he was making Have Gun Will Travel or some, you know, he was a TV star.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. And then as time went on, it started to matter. I didn't think, well, this was Steve McQueen's car, but it was cool. And so he called me and said he'd like to see the car. He was pretty sure it wasn't his car, but he'd love to see it. And I said, sure. So my wife, loves movie stars, she went out with me. We met in Westwood because at the time he was living in Malibu.
Right.
And we met in Westwood, and his eyes just lit up when he saw this car. And he gets out of his car, he just runs for it, you know, and he starts tearing into me, literally tore the glued down carpeting off the back so he could see if the roll bar mounting was still there.
Wow. And
then he checked the front spare tire, and it was a racing recap. He said, oh my God, this is my car, you got to sell it to me. Well, I didn't want to sell it, but after about 3 months of his calling every week, begging me to sell the car, I thought, you know what? I can probably do without it, and he really wants it, and I'll do him a favor, and hopefully it'll come back to me in some way, someday. And so I sold him the car. And then probably 3, 4, 5 years later, he dies. And then Chad has the car now. And I'm happy Chad does, because I mean, it's a meaningful car that It was Steve's first Porsche that he bought brand new and raced it.
It's a family heirloom.
Oh yeah, it's in the right place. I would sure love to have it sitting right where we are, but
Yeah.
it's in the right place.
Yeah. Now you've called Le Mans the Super Bowl, World Cup, World Series all rolled into one, right, in the automotive world. And I know you've been to Le Mans a number of times, and you own cars that raced there and won their class.
It's everything. It is everything you just said. It's the World Cup. It's the Olympic Games. It's everything. And I think if you ask any racer what's the most important motorsport race in the world, other than maybe an Indianapolis, guy. And I used to think Indianapolis was pretty important, and I had a winner from Indy, but it was important to building the brand of Bentley because they won it so many times. Porsche's in there to win it because, that they say win on Sunday, sell on Monday.
That's right.
I had the 1960 Corvette, which was the first Corvette to race at Le Mans. Briggs Cunningham put in 3 cars. But it's everything to the driver and to the automobile manufacturer. It's everything. And it's so important. And I would say maybe, 20 years ago, I started figuring out this Le Mans thing. And this is really important. I bought my first winner. It was a Ferrari from '61.
The short wheelbase
Berlinetta. That was my 60th birthday present to myself. That was a big stretch. And then since then we've put together 5 winners, and they're really important to me and to history. And right behind me is the Corvette that won in '09, very important Corvette. So if there's any theme through here, other than the fact that I bought them one at a time over so many years, it's Le Mans. We have probably focused more on that than anything else. I think if there is a common thread that runs through this garage, is that every car has a story.
Yeah.
And I think it's about the story. It's not just another one of those, but it's a car that won Le Mans, or a car that has some distinctive history, whether it's owned by Clark Gable or the first Corvette. I like the story, and that's what I've tried to stick with that. With the Duesenberg we have, it's a one-off built for Colonel McCormick. So it's not just another Duesenberg or another RS, it's a RSH,
And you have production Shelby Cobra #1 sitting over there.
Right, and I've been a Cobra guy since 1965. I've never been without a Cobra. I think of all the cars I've ever owned, my favorite is a Cobra. And that's just like you say, it's not just a Cobra. It's the very first one, serial #1, which really meant a lot to me. I mean, I've had other Cobras and I've sold them just because that's the one.
Was Carroll Shelby a friend?
Yeah, Carroll Shelby was a good friend. I actually met Carroll Shelby through Robert E. Petersen, the Petersen Museum. And Robert E. Petersen, and most people know, he was the publisher and the creator of Hot Rod magazine. So if there was any publication or printed matter that influenced me, it was Hot Rod magazine. I pored over that magazine, and I think that's one of the biggest influences of my automotive life was Hot Rod magazine. And also hot rods in general, whether it's the Scarab,
Lance Reventlow
Scarab, or the Cobra, or even the Corvettes. These were all created by hot rodders.
Yeah.
People do not give hot rods or hot rodders the credit they deserve. These young men came out of World War II with all this new technology from the war, and they put it to work building hot rods and Bonneville cars and racers, and Jim Hall, the Chaparral. So these were all hot rodders. The hot rodders were the genesis of every cool, fast race car from like the 40s to the 70s, really. All hot rodders, at least out of this country. In England, they came from the war, but they didn't really have hot rods like as we know hot rods. So hot rods are really important to me.
And by the way, can I just mention that you deserve a lot of credit for getting hot rods on the lawn at Pebble, right? That was a long slog, but you did it.
Oh my God. So yeah. it was a 10-year beg fest. I mean, I for 10 years, I lobbied the producers of Pebble Beach to bring in hot rods. How important they were. Every article, Phil Hill was a hot rodder, Dan Gurney was a hot rodder. These were all hot rodders. And I sent them every article that came out that referenced any credible person to hot rods. I would send it to Lauren Tryon and Jules Human. Finally, I just broke them down. After 10 years, I still have the facts. It was like, Bruce, are you sitting down? Okay, this was Christmas of 1996. For 1 year only, we're gonna do hot rods. And like, don't ever ask us again, okay? They put us at the very far end of the show field. I mean, any further, we would have been in the water in the bay. And what was really fun is if you looked over the whole show field, which you could do from the lodge, everybody was down by the hot rodders. Everybody was relating to the hot. It was a massive success.
And you know, hot rodders are as talented and have the same eye as some of the best coach builders in history.
I agree 100%. And they know how to make things work and go fast, and they're craftsmen, they're welders, fabricators, great eye for design. Because there's some hot rods that just stand out or just, mouth-watering, and others just miss. So there's great designs in hot rods, and there's no right or wrong. Hot rodders in general, whether you pull up in a 27 or 28, 29, 30, 32, it doesn't matter. They're just happy to see you and happy that you're enjoying the hobby. It's the most welcoming group of hobbyists. And so anyways, I just going back to Robert E. Petersen, So Petersen was a neighbor of mine. We belonged to this group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. So we were in that together. And then, and Petersen loved planes and fishing and hunting were really his passions. But he found this old building in LA. It was a department store that was just a derelict, and Petersen always liked opportunistic buys. So he thought it was a really good deal, so he basically bought the building and said, Bruce, this would be a great car museum. So, I was kind of the front man. I guess they call the founding chairman. I chaired it for the first 10 years, and I've put the last 25, 30 years of my life into that place, and it's never been better. We have an amazing talented executive group there, led by Terry Cargus and Michael Bodell and his whole crew. The museum has never been better. We're in the black. We have a huge endowment and great plans for the future. So the Petersen Museum stands on its own as being the finest car museum in the world. I just have to put that pitch in there. I don't know I forget what your question was.
Well, no, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was actually going to ask you about it because when I, my first visit to the Petersen was somewhere in, I want to say 99, 2000.
Mm-hmm.
But you've taken it in recent years from a place where the setups were kind of a little bit of a diorama style, right? Which you can see just about at any car museum. And today it is world-class, rotating and curated amazingly well. I mean...
Well, thank you, Maurice. And we redid it, about 10 years ago. When we first started the museum, we partnered with the Natural History Museum. And if you go to the Natural History Museum, dioramas are a big part of their exhibitions. They'll show a dinosaur or some long-toothed lion or some saber cat, and they build a diorama as it was. And we did that with our cars. But we also found out that people that had visited the Petersen and saw the American underslung stuck in the mud or our gas station, they'd seen it once, there was no reason to really go back.
Right.
So we found out that 70% of our visitors were first timers. And that seems cool because we're drawing 70, but it's not what you want. You want it the other way around. You want 70% of the people to come be return visitors.
Right.
And so we did away with the dioramas. We have state-of-the-art exhibits. We can do surround sound, surround videos. We just opened an exhibit of Andy Warhol, who is maybe one of the top contemporary artists of all time.
Sure.
And he did a suite of cars, Mercedes cars, that are priceless. Mercedes sent us over the cars and the original art. There isn't a museum in the world that wouldn't give anything for this exhibit, any art museum in the world. So we have world-class art exhibits. We have a James Bond exhibit there now, supercars, hypercars. It's just an awesome place, and it's doing really, really well. And it's all because of Robert E. Petersen, Hot Rod Magazine, you know, his success. We would never be there without him.
What's been your favorite drive? Whether it's and this goes with, you know, the car and the venue, because I know you've been to Goodwood, you've done the Mille Miglia.
So that's a really good question, because every car in here is such a distinctive personality on the road. You know, the Bentley behind us, we've toured Europe in it. We did a rally from Budapest to Prague in the Cobra. The Duesenberg is just a big, you know, honking 400 horsepower truck. And the Porsche 935, 800 horsepower, you better be pointed laser straight or it's gonna swap ends on you. But my favorite ride is Bonneville. You know, growing up as a hot rodder, I always wanted to race a car at Bonneville, and I raced a '83 Camaro. I went 224 in that, but then I wanted to race in an open car, a hot rod. So we built a Roadster, and I wanted to go over 200, and we accomplished that. So that 200-mile-an-hour ride, to me, was the ride of my life. I can't think of anything that was more exciting and more fulfilling than going over 200 in an open car. So I would have to say the Roadster ride at Bonneville tops them all.
Well, now you're going down the Salt at 200 miles an hour. You got a lot of wind buffet. Anything could happen. Where was your focus at that point? Were you just thinking, I got to keep this thing straight?
You definitely have to keep it straight. That's number one in your mind. You know, it's interesting. I raced motorcycles when I was younger. My parents didn't even know I owned a motorcycle, because that was my life that they didn't know about. And because I could keep motorcycles when I was in college, of course they wouldn't know. And when I was younger, in my teens, I had motorcycles, and I kept them in friends' garages. But in like the early 60s, I started racing motorcycles. And I'd think all week before the racing, I really shouldn't be doing this. If I get hurt, you know, my parents are just, they would be so disappointed, you know. And then come the weekend, you put that helmet on, the last thing you're thinking about is your parents, you know. Your eyes are like this, you just want to go for it, you know. And so when you're at Bonneville, I think most of all, you want to be safe, and you want to keep the car going straight. And there's a lot, it seems like, oh, this is simple, you know, straight line, anybody can do this. Well, it's like doing a wheelie for 3 miles, you know. You don't want to, first of all, that Roadster has like 800 horsepower, maybe 900. So at any time, you know, the rear wheels could start spinning, and the rear wheels want to pass the front wheels. So if you're not going straight, it's gonna come about on you. So there's an art to going straight, and there's an art to going over 200, and that's just the most memorable ride of my life. And then I joined the 200-mile-an-hour club, which was just something I still can't believe that I'm in that. I'm so proud to wear that red hat.
You know, that brings me to your motto, which is never lift. And I know you got that from Parnelli Jones. And when I hear that, what I think of is seize the day, right? Do what you want in life, because life is short. Is that pretty much why you've adopted that motto?
You know, it is. It means more to me now that I'm older. You realize the only thing you have in life is time and health. And you take any one of those two ingredients out, it's over. And any moment you have that you're healthy and you've got some time in front of you is a good time. So I just say, keep focusing on the front, do what you like, never lift, and if you're lucky enough to have a profession that you enjoy, you never work a day in your life. And I've been so blessed. And I thank God, literally, every single day for my many blessings.
Absolutely. Well, you're known as the nicest guy in the car hobby, and it's really true. So, Bruce Meyer, thanks for having us in. It's been a real treat.
Well, Maurice, it's my pleasure, and you're a great champion of the hobby and the passion, and I'm honored to have you here. And I know we'll continue seeing one another at all the great events.
Appreciate it.
All right, brother.